Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all having a fantastic Saturday. It is Saturday early evening here, just gone 6 o'clock. Now, the subject I want to talk about today are royal stalkers, because I've been reading up on this and it is fascinating. Just try and imagine the difficulty that the police have in protecting members of the royal family. I mean, a lot of people look at them and think it's a highly privileged position, which yes it is. They've got castles, they've got palaces, but there is a constant security risk. And obviously the Netflix show Baby Reindeer has been on recently. Not that that story depicted a dangerous stalker or predator. Not the woman was not depicted that way at all. But I've been looking up some stalking cases and I've come across some very interesting cases. And I want to handle this quite delicately and try and understand it from the point of view of the perpetrator, because that's apparently what the police and the forces do. They are assessing constantly current risks. They keep certain individuals under surveillance who they believe are a problem. Now, how do they distinguish between a royal fan and someone they might potentially consider a problem? And how do they assess at what point that person may become a serious danger? And this is something actually that applies to people in everyday life, or all of us, because stalking, as we all know, it's a huge thing. It's something I'm sure that's always been around. It's probably gotten a lot worse since the internet came along, unfortunately. So I thought I'd go over a few famous cases, and I shall begin this video as I intend to finish it. And I will give a word of advice to the British royal family. Please don't let any more stalkers marry into your family. No more talk of that. Apparently, in the build-up to the coronation, there was a big explosion of these type of people who were worrying, because when the late Queen died, apparently an awful lot of people came forward to claim the British throne and felt that they should be attending certain functions. So obviously, and they communicate this to the police and the authorities. Of course, there are the famous cases like Princess Anne, who there was a kidnap attempt and they're going, not bloody likely, and I think her bodyguard was shot. There's also, this one was really interesting. Apparently in 2020, a man called James Ballinger was jailed after making multiple 999 calls about Princess Anne again. And apparently he said that Princess Anne had control of his mind. Now, with mental health, as we all know, it's not a physical injury, so nobody can actually see that there's something wrong. So put yourself again in the authorities, the police shoes, where they've got to assess. And how would you even begin to detect it? Well, it becomes detectable because of a person's own behaviour. Catherine in 2022, Princess of Wales, had 170 stalkers. Well, I think that's quite a low figure. I would imagine it's higher than that. But I suppose what they mean by 170 are those that have been assessed on the danger level. And I mean, the security forces will have had a lot of experience over the decades, going right back to the very, very first monarch. There was also the Michael Fagin in 1982, who made it into the palace. Although Netflix bigged it all up about what had actually happened. Now, this is another interesting point. Royal stalkers trebled between the year 2020 and 2023. I mean, could that be anything to do with orchestrated funding, online hate campaigns of a certain fan base? I mean, it's the way it comes across to me, the more I look into this subject, and I urge you to do some research into this as well, is the more apparent things got a little spicier after Harry and Meghan left the royal family. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but you look into it. Now, one particular case I wanted to talk about is a woman called Leah Ann. Now, Leah Ann, and I've got to get this right because I only just come across this, and this is just one person. This is one particular condition which apparently is quite rare. But I thought you might find this one interesting, guys. I certainly do. I was fascinated by it, and I'm going to carry on reading about it over the weekend. It is called Erotomania. Now, I'd never heard of this before, and it's not what you think. It's not like, sex addict. It may be called erotomania, but it's not that. And I've got here just the general wiki page, but there's a hell of a lot more to this subject. And I found this one quite fascinating because Leah Anne had developed a fixation with more than one person, I think including the King of Belgium, and also various Russian nobility, but she became transfixed with George V. I know, an unlikely character. I never really thought of George V or Queen Mary as having stalkers, but apparently so, yes. And Leah Anne would spend hours outside Buckingham Palace staring up at it day after day. And every time she saw the curtains move, she was convinced that it was George V signalling to her because he was in love with her. Now, nobody knew this was going on until her behaviour and a few violent outbursts brought her to the attention of authorities. And then psychiatrists and various people, there's a guy, I really can't pronounce his name. Some of you guys might know how to pronounce it. He's a psychiatrist, Cleramambol. Now, it's a relatively uncommon paranoid condition that she had. It's characterised by an individual's delusions of another person being infatuated with them. So, I mean, this is a really unusual one. It is listed in the DSM-5 as a subtype of a delusional disorder. Commonly onset of erotomania is sudden and the course is chronic. Now, erotomania is more common in women, but may be more dangerous amongst men due to the increased risk of violence and stalker-like behaviours. It comes across to me from this wiki page, and I'm not a doctor, right, guys, and I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm an ignoramus just discussing a subject with you guys. That's what the comments section is for. So, and by no means, if anybody out there has a condition like this, I'm not commenting one way or another. But as it goes on and on throughout the article, and you'll see, they will stalk this particular condition. In 9 out of 10 cases, they will stalk. The core symptom of erotomania is that the individual holds an unshakable belief that another person is secretly in love with them. In some cases, the person with the condition may believe several people at once are admirers. Most commonly, the individual has delusions of being loved by an unattainable person who is usually an acquaintance or someone the person has never met. So, I mean, the monarch, King George V, perfect. He is perfect, isn't he? He's about as unattainable as it's going to get. But this can happen. I mean, this is a rare condition, apparently, but this can happen with individuals, you, I, anybody of any walk of life. Acquaintance or someone they've never met. They may also experience other types of delusion concurrently with erotomania, such as delusions of reference, wherein the perceived admirer secretly communicates their love by subtle methods such as body posture, arrangement of household objects, colours, numbers, license plates on a car from specific states, and other seemingly innocuous acts. Or if the person is a public figure, choices. Some delusions may be extreme, such as the conception, birth and kidnapping of children that never existed. No jokes, and I don't want to see anything in the comments section, okay, about that. We should move on. Or they think they've been chosen by God to be with the object of their obsession. Delusional objects may be replaced by others over time. So they can, it could be King George V one day and Queen Mary the next, or another member of the family, or the Duchess of York, as she would have been then, who became the Queen Mother. Erotomania has two forms, primary and secondary. Primary erotomania is also commonly referred to as, and I just can't pronounce this guy's name, but I will put a link in the description, Cleramambol, I think, he was French, syndrome, and old maid's insanity. That's rather rude, isn't it? And it exists alone with, and I don't know what this is, comorbidities. has a sudden onset and chronic outcome. The secondary form is found along with mental disorders such as paranoid schizophrenia, often includes persecutory delusions, hallucinations, and grandiose ideas, and has a more gradual onset with patients fixated, with patients with a fixed condition are more seriously ill with constant delusions and are less responsive. So with a condition like this, if it's got a very gradual onset, I mean, that makes the job of the police even more difficult. These individuals are usually timid, dependent women that are often sexually or socially inexperienced, but they can also be men. In those with more mild recurrent condition, delusions are shorter lived and the disorder can exist undetected by others for years. Problematic behaviour include actions like calling and texting, sending letters and unwanted gifts, persistent internet harassment via social media and email, making unannounced house visits, like outside Buckingham Palace. Although, fair enough, you know, there's a lot of tourists do that, but I mean, to stand there day after day, hours and hours and hours at the curtains because the king is making his advances by the curtains is a, you know, then we got a problem, haven't we? As I guess the police would put it. Or contacting or attempting to contact the object's friends, family or co-workers or other persistent stalking behaviours. So, I mean, it just goes to show that's actually not that long ago, George V. I know it might seem, my kids might think that was like back in the days of cavemen and dinosaurs, but it's not that long ago. I mean, George V was the Queen's grandfather. So they had this problem then. And Queen Victoria, there were assassination attempts on her as well, as we know. I think that's how Prince Albert ended up. He took a bullet for her, didn't he? And he died prematurely as a result, not immediately from it, but as a result of health issues. And before that, and before that. So it's not something new for the security forces, and they will have tried and tested methods, but the internet, of course, has presented new challenges. And it seems that even further, it's been increased and exacerbated by some perhaps hatred or some Oprah interview where somebody said they were all racists. That's not going to help, is it? But then there's the rest of us general public, and I thought you might find it interesting just to look at a subject like that. And we can look at other cases because there are different categories of stalking. And I suppose that's what the police do. They look at that individual, but the individual isn't going to come to the attention of the police until they've done something out of the ordinary or bizarre or threatening. I mean, that guy with Princess Anne, he had made hundreds of phone calls. What was his name again? Got it there. James Ballinger. I mean, hundreds of 999 calls saying he was going to go and kill the princess because she was controlling his mind. I mean, how can you fight that? I know it's not a laughing matter. And I know that some people, they you know, you need to get them help. But it does complicate things for royals, and as we as a family have gone through some stuff in last couple of recent years, largely due to the fact that I commentate on the royal family and Meghan Markle, oddly enough. So we start to, but we don't get it anywhere near like the royals do. I mean, it is a constant worry. It must be a constant fear for them. It's easy to think that they're there inside a fortified palace. But actually, there's a lot of doors and windows to guard. And that guy, Fagin, did get in and he got into the Queen's bedroom. And I don't think it's that exceptional a thing to have done or achieved. There have been other people who've made it over the wall of Buckingham Palace. And then there are country estates, Highgrove, where they might be staying. I personally have never really wanted to live in the middle of nowhere. I had an auntie who lived out in Chailey, and she had a gorgeous house. And I went to stay with her 2 or 3 nights, and the lights were on in the house, and she quite often didn't draw her curtains. And I was like, but what if somebody's out in the woods and they're staring? They can see right into the house. Or they could be the other side of the house. I mean, they could walk all the way around. This is not a town. So it's always freaked me out, the idea of living in the middle of nowhere. I love being on the boat here because we've got a moat all the way around. the members of the public, they've got to swim. And if they come in the other way, they've got to not only get past a security door, there's security cameras, and we've got 3 different types of police and armed security guards on the premises all the time. In fact, fuck it, Harry, you should just buy a boat and live in a marina. You'd have much better security than anywhere else. But for me, being in a town is a lot safer, because you've got people near you, and chances are people would only be able to break in the front of the house or the back of the house, whereas out in the country, I mean, they can get in anywhere, can't they? They can get in anywhere, any part of the house. I guess that's why in America you are all armed, especially when you live in the middle of nowhere, because you just never know. But I used to look out into the dark and think, God, there could be anybody out there in the woods at this time of night, and I wouldn't be able to see them. If I lived there, I'd have all the lights off so that the light outside would be lighter. Do you know what I mean? And then I just wouldn't live my life until the sun came up. I'd be awful about it. I used to be like that. I mean, I grew up in a big house and I used to go around opening all the doors. All the doors had to be open on my house in Lewes and in Hove. Always have the doors open because then I can hear. I can hear if someone's breaking in. So if it's a big house or a palace, well, you wouldn't catch me in a building like that. Anyway, thoughts, opinions. How the hell do you think they cope? And do you think there is any connection or correlation between the fact that Meghan and Harry have caused an awful lot of shit and that the threats on the royal family seem to have soared in recent years? Thank you very much for listening.